Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Big Game Hunters. I'm Mike.
And I'm Tom. Just a quick reminder for everybody, we've got a Kickstarter we're running to fund Season 3 of the show, so if you're a fan, head on over there and check it out. Today, we're reviewing another game by Mike Elliot, Quarriors from WizKids. But first, Chit Chat.
In today's Chit Chat, we're going to be picking up right where we left off last week, talking about perceived balance versus actual balance in games. Welcome to the Chit Chat. Today, we're going to pick up where we left off last week. Last week, we promised you that we would talk about perceived balance compared to actual balance, but we had so much to say about playtesting that we didn't quite get to it. I think it's a related issue, certainly, because balance is important when you're playtesting. That's really what you're playtesting for frequently. Mm-hmm. Not just does the game feel fun, is there too much downtime, etc., but also are the different pieces balanced, are the different factions balanced, etc. This one was pretty much inspired by a blog post I read from Greg at 3D Total Games, so credit to him. And he raised a lot of interesting issues in that article, and I figured we could kind of talk about them here today.
I think one of the most poignant things he says in that article that sort of links playtesting with what we want to say about balance is that the farther along you get in playtesting, the less mathematical, the less mechanical your balancing methods are going to be. And here's why. Tell us.
So yeah, exactly. As the game becomes more complex, you have to go on feeling. Now the problem with that is people often feel that something is balanced when it's really not, or vice versa, because people are kind of bad at probability. Mm-hmm. They have sort of natural statistical biases. When I took stats in high school, my teacher used the example of a radio program was hosting a call-in vote, and they were talking about whether or not whether Elvis is alive or dead. Mm. And if you just go by their poll, you would think that something like 70% of people thought that Elvis is alive. Now, we know is kind of ridiculous, but it's because of a selection bias. The only people who wanted to call in and talk about it were people who felt strongly about it, and the only people who felt strongly were the people who were kind of conspiracy theorists about him being alive. Yep. So that's an example of selection bias. And these kind of biases come up all the time, and probability isn't always natural for us to think about. We kind of have these kind of false ideas about probability in our minds already.
That he mentions this in his article, that it can come up in playtesting a game where, based on the specific style of gamer, lots of intense gamers, especially the people who are going to seek out games to playtest, are going to be more interested in game elements that are more complex. Mm-hmm. So those game elements are going to see more playtesting. And by better players. So those specific elements, so say for example, it's a character. Everyone gets a character. The characters that have more complexity are going to get used by the players with more talent and more investment in exploring the mechanics of the game. Mm-hmm. So thereby, those specific characters might seem they influence the game more than they actually do, just because of the person playing them. He uses the game as an example. I can't remember the game he uses.
Sentinels of the Multiverse. It's a cooperative kind of hero deck building game.
What was the problem? What was the issue with that one that he uses?
I don't think he referenced specific characters, but it's the idea that the characters with complex abilities or very elaborate powers he thought to be weaker than the ones with straightforward, just plus to fighting powers.
And it was because of the people who...
He felt that the group was not well controlled. I think the opposite, now that I think about it, is kind of true in Thunderstone a little bit. Now, I play Thunderstone quite a bit, and I do tend to gravitate towards the more, maybe not more complex heroes, but the ones that can ramp up more, the ones that are more dependent on the other things in your deck. Yeah. And I do feel like those are more powerful than the ones that are just kind of nice big bonuses or give you light or whatnot. So I feel like there may be kind of, not the opposite effect in Thunderstone, but Thunderstone might end up rewarding more complicated strategies or more focused decks. And since better players end up using them, it's hard for me to say if that's true or not, though.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of close to, in playtesting, are those elements being perceived as equal, or are people playing them as equal? Yeah, it really comes down to the person playing them. If your playtest group is a bunch of casual gamers, they're going to go after those cards that are obviously good, that obviously make it good. And so the ones that sort of build or ramp up might seem like less powerful, and some bad things can squeak in that way if they don't get.
And of course, he raised in the article that actual perceived probability of something becomes closer to the actual probability as you play it more.
Right.
So if you play something a lot, you might initially think when you first encounter something in a game, oh, that's broken. That's so overpowered. That's OP. It's ridiculous. But then with repeated exposure, as you see the dice come up, over and over, it kind of settles in your mind, and you maybe realize that it is balanced, or vice versa.
Yeah, the perception that whatever's initially overpowered or underpowered or something, as you play the game more, you learn more about how the game comes together to form a game, and you then realize that element isn't necessarily bad, which is why it's so poignant when we point out things in games. Like Seasons is immediately coming to mind. All those cards you removed that I just never really occurred to me to remove them until you pointed out that those cards are off the power scale.
I think a lot of it comes up, and he talks about cumulative probability in games, and that's a common occurrence for this. So cumulative probability is the idea that you have to make several die rolls successfully in order for something to happen. And there's a general trend in statistics for people to underestimate how likely or overestimate how likely all those events are to occur. In other words, if something, if there's, you have to make at least a roll of 2 on several die rolls, people think, oh, well, a 2 is so easy. So even though I have to make it multiple times, I'll probably do it.
Yes. When
in actuality, it's if you have 5 rolls of 2 to make it, it's pretty close to having to make a roll of 5 or more on a single die.
I think that specific instance on that the specific instance of cumulative probability is really dependent on the person's personality, education. I think people will either overestimate or underestimate it, but I think very few people are going to immediately recognize it for what it is. You see this in Last Night on Earth. It's pretty prevalent in the game where you have a weapon, you roll to hit, and then you have to roll to keep the weapon. Either it runs out of ammo or it breaks or whatever. That's a cumulative probability. So when somebody sees like the shotgun, oh, the shotgun is so good, but the shotgun's also pretty easy to lose. So.
Yeah, I know when we were playing Pocket Battles, the Berserker unit on the Orc faction, he's got 1 hit point, and he can roll 1 to 6.
An immense amount of dice.
He can roll 1 to 5 or 6 dice, which is huge in Pocket Battles. If he rolls any 1s, he damages and kills himself and does no damage. But otherwise, he just scores that number of hits. Or scores hits normally. And he's someone that I think initially you thought was just going to dominate. You had a little bit of confusion on the charge rules, and that certainly played into it. But he's something where I think you need to throw an extra guy on him.
In my defense, I recognized that he was likely to die without doing damage, but that was sort of part of my strategy. I was like, it really doesn't matter if he dies because I'm not basing him on.
But that's something where I can see people overrating how useful he is. Because it's like, oh, I won't roll a 1. Roll 1 is so unlikely, even though you're rolling 6 dice, so it's not too unlikely. What's another example? Summoner Wars, right?
Summoner Wars. The what was the guy? The shaman in the orcs. He's a really low-costed unit. I forget his exact cost, but I remember that for a low-cost unit, he gets to roll 2 attack dice, which is pretty big for a low-cost unit. Only his caveat is that both his attack dice have to hit in order for any hits to happen.
Right.
And you get varying opinions. Some people say, oh, that's really good, you should play that unit, and the other people say, oh, that's not good, you should not play that unit.
I think for a long time I thought he was a little better than he is.
Yeah, I'm still undecided. I have seen good decks use them, and I personally have had bad luck with them, but it goes either way. But it's just another example of cumulative probability.
Sure. I think also sometimes people tend to mix up things that are actually equivalent. So he raised in the article the idea of if you're playing a 2-player game like Magic, a card that says take another turn versus a card that says your opponent skips a turn. In a 2-player game, those are equivalent, but people don't think of them the same way. They have a different feeling. For instance, when we were playing Seasons, it was a 3-player game, and I made a play that the net result was that me and the other player at the table gained 2 points. And when I did so, I said, oh, sorry, Tom. And I think it took you a second to realize, because you didn't feel like you were getting attacked.
Right.
You didn't feel like you were losing.
Right.
But because we were both gaining in a 3-player game, the net result was identical to Tom loses 2 points.
Right.
So it's something that, I think people have it either has a negative or positive connotation.
A very basic example of that same exact thing is in Guillotine. You can move a noble forward in the line, or you can move a noble backward in the line, and those have the exact same effect, but if you're not really paying close attention to the game, or if you're new to the game, you can be like, I don't have the right card to get the guy I want to the front, because all I have is guys who move the front guy.
That kind of thing. And this is all important to remember when you're playtesting and when you're balancing, and that people kind of have these biases, that they tend to remember the big events and forget the small ones. So you do have kind of those things at play. And I think it's important also to remember that when we're talking about balance, we're talking about balance kind of holistically. So even though in a faction-based game, for instance, I play a lot of these games that have, you play a single deck or you play a single character, like Epic Duels or Summoner Wars, even though one element might seem unbalanced, one thing might be out of whack, you have to look at the deck as a whole. So if the whole deck gives you a roughly equal chance of winning as any other deck, then I would say that it's balanced, that these factions are balanced. That doesn't help with something like Seasons, where it's a communal deck. If one card's out of whack, it becomes very noticeable.
Right, because one person can get that card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's something where the more unbalanced it is, the faster you notice, and the more of a negative play experience you end up having.
Yep.
But yeah, anything else unbalanced, Tom?
No, I think we've about covered it.
All right, so now I'm going to teach you how to play. What game are we doing today? Quarriors, of course. The game by Mike Elliot. Now I'm going to teach you how to play Quarriors. Quarriors is essentially a deck building game that replaces the cards with dice. The goal of the game is to be the first player to reach a predetermined amount of glory based on the number of players. For a 4-player game, the goal is to reach 20 glory. You'll mainly get glory by scoring creatures that have survived for one round. Once one player reaches the predetermined amount of glory, the game ends with that player being the victor. Quarriors comes with a number of unique components. Each player will receive a dice bag that he or she will use to keep their collection in. The game has a glory tracker with wooden cubes that players will use to keep score. It has a number of power cards that correspond to the various dice, and of course, lots of plastic dice. On the power cards, you'll see a few stats. In the middle of the card, you'll see the creature or spell's name. In the top right, you'll see the amount of glory that the creature is worth when it's scored. And in the top left, you'll see the cost to purchase the creature and place it in your bag. In the middle bottom of the card, you'll see various effects. If effects are dependent on rolling a burst symbol, that's the asterisk or potentially double asterisk, then those will be delineated as such. At the bottom, you'll see these 6 sides of the dice that correspond to the card. Certain spells or creatures will have certain keywords. For instance, the immediate keyword means that this spell or creature must be resolved before resolving any non-immediate cards. Reaction means that the spell can be used anytime, usually in response to another effect. And finally, attach means that the spell must be linked to a readied creature in order to do anything. On the dice, you'll see various symbols. If the 2 symbols appear next to one another without anything else, then you will get to resolve both symbols. However, if there is a line between them, then you must choose to resolve one or the other. On the dice, you'll see quiddity. That's the little teardrop symbol. That's the basic resource that you'll use to buy things in or to summon creatures. On the creature sides of the die, you'll see a few stats as well. In the top left is the level. This is how much quiddity you'll have to pay in order to summon the creature, and usually is a measure of its power. In the top right, you'll see the creature's attack value. This is how much damage the creature will deal during the attack step. And in the bottom right, you'll see its defense. This is how much damage it can soak before being destroyed. To set up a game of Quarriors, first you'll have to build the wilds. The wilds refers to the selection of dice that you can buy throughout the game. First, the wilds will always include basic quiddity, assistants, and portals. You'll take 2 assistants and place them next to the assistant card, and 5 portal dice and place them next to the portal card. After that, you'll determine the rest of the set randomly. You'll choose 3 spells from the spell deck at random, and you cannot have 2 spells of the same type. In other words, you can have life spell and death spell, but you cannot have life spell and life incantation. After that, you'll do the same thing for 7 creatures. Again, you must have all different creatures, so you cannot have the Defender of the Pale and the Strong Defender of the Pale in the same set. You'll place the corresponding dice next to the cards, and then you'll build your initial bags. To do so, you'll include 8 quiddity dice and 4 assistant dice in every player's bag. Then, you'll shake up the dice, and you must determine the starting player. We like to pull out quiddity dice from our bag and see who rolls the most quiddity. Now, you're ready to begin. Quarriors is played out in turns, and each turn will follow 6 simple steps. First, you'll score creatures and call dice. When you score creatures, any creatures that you have in your ready area from the previous turn will give you an amount of glory as depicted on their card. Once you move up the glory tracker, you'll discard any creatures that scored into your used area. Then, for every creature that you scored, you can cull 1 die. When you cull a die, you'll simply take a die from your used pile and place it back into the wilds. After that, you'll draw 6 dice from your bag. If you don't quite have 6 dice, you'll draw as many as you can and then shuffle your entire used pile in your bag. After you've drawn your dice, they go into your active pool, and then you will roll them from there. Again, these will stay in your active pool until they are readied. In the next step, you will ready your spells and summon your creatures. When you ready a spell, assuming you rolled the spell side of the die, you'll simply place it in your ready area, and you can keep it there as long as you like. You can cast it whenever appropriate, either now or on a future turn. When you summon a creature, you must spend quiddity equal to its level, that's at the top left, and then you also place it in your ready area. Once you've readied all your spells and summoned all your creatures will attack all of your opponents. You simply add up all the attack values of your creatures, and each opponent receives that much damage. When you receive damage, you, as the recipient of the damage, can choose how it is applied. You will apply all of the damage to one creature. It will absorb as much as it can based on its defense at the bottom right of the die. And then any remaining damage will spill over onto another creature. Again, you can choose which creature this damage spills over to. If a creature sustains as much damage as it had health, of course, it is discarded into your used pile. After you attack, you can capture 1 die from the wilds. To do this, you'll spend any remaining quiddity that you did not use to summon creatures in order to purchase 1 die at the cost at the top. When you purchase a die, it goes directly into your used pile, which will later be shuffled into your bag, and you can roll it into your active pool and then play the die. Finally, you will discard any dice that you haven't used into your used pile, with the exception of readied spells and readied creatures. Now you know how to play Quarriors. Now that you know how to play Quarriors, we're going to take a look at it in our point-counterpoint review.
Because Mike and I agree about the game, we're going to roll to see who argues for it and who argues against. If it's even, I'll take the pros, and if it's odd, he will. It's odd, again.
Why do you hate games so much, Tom?
They're too much fun.
Apparently. But you know what? This one is too much fun because there's practically no setup time in this. You just pull the dice out of the tin, throw them on the table, organize them, and you're ready to play.
Organize them.
But seriously, compared to other deck builders, this one's setup time is nothing. I love Thunderstone, I like Dominion, but setting them up takes a lot of time. Ascension is quick, but that's a different animal altogether. This one, you get the same kind of experience where you can choose from a nice array of cards to buy or dice to buy, but because every card has the 3 different versions, and that kind of builds your set for you. You don't have to worry about a bad set coming out of the random element, and you don't have to worry about digging through all your little selector cards in order to find the cards you need.
That's a really great feature. Setup time is one of the big problems I have with games like Thunderstone.
And cleanup.
Unfortunately, this one has a problem that those sort of alleviate, and that is there's too much luck in these dice. So not only are you going to roll every turn, and not any one face is better or worse than any other face. Like obviously 2 quiddity is better than 1 quiddity, but still, if you get a lot of quiddity, that's good, and if you get some monsters or something, that's good. But it's not necessarily what you need on that turn. Mm-hmm. And the dice you're pulling from your bag is a luck factor too. So if you're still trying to build your dice deck and you're still pulling out the assistance or just the quiddity, your options are a little limited, and it just sort of hinders the deck building element.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people lose this game because they roll all creatures and can't summon anything.
Yep.
Their turn is done, or they never roll their big creatures. They just keep hitting on the quid side and they can't make any headway.
Yep.
But that said, it's nice that this game does have that luck, and that you do sometimes just lose the luck. But it's okay because you can replay it so many times that eventually you're going to win because the replay value is so high. This is by far, of the deck builders that I'm familiar with, the most complete right out of the initial set. The Thunderstone base set's decent. I don't like the Dominion base set. This one, it feels like a complete game in the tin. It's certainly right for expansion, but this one, because you have about 15 different dice, and each die has 3 versions or 4 versions for the spells, there's a lot of replayability. There's a lot of different combinations that come up right out of the initial tin.
Yeah, replayability is huge for this game, especially the different spell versions, the different creature versions. Increase that
And you know what? The dice are a little more complex than I think some of the other base games. The base Thunderstone and base Dominion, they kind of hedge a little with their effects. These have really fully fleshed out effects, really unique abilities. Like the Primordial Ooze, that would never be a base set Dominion card. That's a great base set Warriors card.
Yeah, the replayability, the effects, those are all great elements. Something I think the more you play it, though, you're going to realize a little farther down the line that a lot of the choices you have to make regarding what to purchase with your Quiddity, those are what we're going to maybe talk about later is false choices. And that is the idea that each turn you're just basically going to want to buy the most powerful thing you can. You might have a decision between 2 things that are equally costed, and you'll have to evaluate which one is the better buy, which one is the better for your situation. But for the most part, you're just going to buy the biggest thing you can afford each turn, whether that's a spell or a creature. And that just sort of, again, removes part of the element of deck building if everybody is going after the same things.
That's absolutely true. The upside of that is because the choices aren't as meaningful as other deck builders, because it's more luck based, the game is actually a little more inclusive. This one is kind of a deck builder light. I like to have it in my collection because I can play with my little cousins. I can play with friends who aren't really into gaming. You can play this one with anybody, and they don't have to have a great level of investment. Yeah. You don't have to go through as much teaching as with Thunderstone. They can get some of that same feel in a lighter version that they can be a little more competitive in.
Yeah, inclusive, it's true. You can play it with people who aren't as involved in gaming and aren't as into tactics and things like that. But at the other end of the scale, you get the hardcore gamers. They're going to quickly point out some of the problems in the balance scale of these cards, particularly the dragon and the demon, right?
Yeah, the demon from the first expansion.
Yeah, they're first expansion. They're just off the charts powerful. First person to get them out on the field is going to win, usually.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. But on the whole, now that we've done our points and counterpoints, what do you really think of it, Tom?
I do like this game. I think it's a really interesting game. I said before that I'm not really into deck builders, but like you said, this is a deck builder light that I think I can really get into. Plus, I love dice. This game's got plenty of dice. That
sounds like it's right up your alley.
Right up my alley. I do have the same concern. Like in your game, you take out the dragon and the demon. Mm-hmm. I haven't really played this enough to make that decision for myself yet. But I think the more I play it, the more I would realize I have to do something about that. I'm just not 100% convinced that this is a really awesome game. But I do want to buy this game. I am going to buy this game. And I imagine that I would play it a lot because it does have a lot of replay value. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10.
Solid score. This one, I've gone back and forth on it. This, I think, was a little bit of a flash in the pan game. I know people were really stoked for this one at Gen Con, myself included. And I liked it for a while. I was really into it. I played it a lot. It started to kind of wear on me, I have to say. It does have good replay value. It's not like I got sick of the combos or sick of the cards in the set or anything. It felt like there was just once everyone had played it a bit, we felt like it was so predominantly luck. And in a game like this, that's pretty damning because, with deck builders, I really like the skill involved. I really like feeling like I'm building something unique. With this one, I feel like it's, I'm not really doing anything different than anybody else. And it's pretty much the first person to hit the right things at the right times runs away with it. Like you said, I had to house rule out the dragon and the demon. I've taken out a few things since then that are also huge in the expansions. And I always want to play to a little bit more glory than it actually recommends. I feel like the game ramps up a little better if you play to 20 with 3 players. So I kind of up the numbers on there. For me, this one is a little like Grimoire. It's better than average. It fills a place in my collection. It's deck builder light, but I don't love it. I don't feel like I want to bring it out with my hardcore group, whereas I think other light games I can enjoy with them. This is going to get a 6 from me.
All right. That is our review of Quarriors. Get ready for the Quakedown. And now we have the breakdown of Quarriors from designer Mike Elliot and WizKids. Quarriors is a short game. It takes maybe 30 to 40 minutes to play, so we give it 80 short and 20 long. Each turn is short, and you are fairly interested on your opponent's turn even if you're not active, so we give it 65 fast and 35 slow. There's lots of luck in how the dice roll. There's some skill in spending your quiddity, so we give it 75 luck and 25 skill. The big choice you're going to make each turn is to whether to summon or purchase, and usually when you purchase, you're just going to buy the biggest and best thing you can, but there is some strategy to spending your quiddity to combo creatures and spells, so we give it 80 tactics and 20 strategy. It's mostly independent gameplay, but the only way to prevent another person from scoring is by interaction, so we give it 40 interaction, 60 independence. We give it 35 immersion and 65 abstraction. Almost all the creatures are evocative of the archetype they're trying to portray, but there's not much else that fits the theme in the game. Quarriors is extremely easy to learn, but the changing cards between the games can add an element of difficulty, so we give it 80 simplicity and 20 complexity. We give it 45 portability and 55 grandeur. It's a very compact game and all the components look good, and even though it's a very small box, the box's shape makes it more prominent on your shelf. We give it 50-50 for expandability and completeness. There are plenty of ways to expand the game, but once again, it's a completely viable game if you choose not to expand it. For our trophy scales, we give it 5 trophies in originality. It's a unique deck builder that uses dice in combat, and it serves as deck builder light in your library. For value, we give it 4 trophies, just because there's a lot of dice for the money. Mike gave it a 6 out of 10, Tom gave it a 7 out of 10, and that is the breakdown of Quarriors.
We hope you enjoyed playing Quarriors with us today. Next week in the Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about swing and rubber band mechanics. And we're going to be playing Blue Moon City, another game from Reiner Knizia.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly updates. See the links below for our Facebook, Twitter, and Kickstarter pages. And leave us a comment on your thoughts on game balance.
See you next week. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Being Game Hunter. I fucked it up. I don't know what happened. It just came out wrong. It was really close. I mean, these things are weird. Alright, it's getting boring saying it over and over.